So good morning. Today is Shushan Purim of 2022, and it is also our day to learn Daf Yud Aleph in Maseches Yevamos. And let me share my screen and get that going. What have we done recently? So yesterday we introduced a dispute between Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan in connection with the status of a widow with whom chalitza was performed. So again, Reuven married Rachel and has brothers Levi and Shimon, and Reuven dies without children, and now Levi comes to Rachel and he performs chalitza with her. So as a result, now she's able to marry whomever she wants, and she's not allowed to marry either Levi or Shimon. But okay, and now if what happens if Levi now marries Rachel anyway, and Levi is married to both Rachel and Leah. We won't say that they're sisters this time; they're just two separate women, and so. And what's now? Levi dies without any children. What's the story of this? In connection with that, or what are the halachot associated with all of those people? So all agree that once chalitza has been performed, so once Levi has done chalitza with Rachel, all the brothers are not allowed to marry Rachel. None of the brothers, because they go back. Because they have a they are brothers-in-law for Rachel, and so as a result, that they're not allowed to marry her. And they all agree that they're not allowed to marry any of her co-wives. So if Levi is married to Leah, so she's not allowed to marry her. If I apologize, I was focusing already on the second marriage, but let's just focus on the first marriage. I apologize. So Reuven is married to Rachel and Leah. Reuven now dies without children. So Levi now does chalitza on Rachel. So Rachel is prohibited to all of the brothers, to Levi and Shimon, because Levi and Shimon as the chalutza, and Leah is also prohibited to Levi and Shimon because she's the co-wife of the chalutza. So, but we saw that in some cases, Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan disagree about the level of the prohibition. So you have a nice chart on the screen. Hopefully that can be helpful. So again, if we're talking about the brother who performs chalitza, and we're talking about the chalutza, so we're talking about Levi and Rachel in the example that I gave. Well, Reish Lakish, everybody says that it's a lav. Everybody says that it's not actually punishable by kares if they go back together, but it's only a lav. What about the other co-wives? What about if Levi were to marry Leah, who was again the co-wife of Rachel when they were married to Reuven, who died without children? So the co-wife Leah is punishable according to Reish Lakish with kares if Levi were to marry her, and but according to Rabbi Yochanan, it's just a lav. As for the other brothers, what about Shimon's relationship? So again, here doesn't make a difference whether it's a chalutza or the co-wife. Reish Lakish says that if Shimon were to marry either Rachel or Leah, it would be kares. Where Rabbi Yochanan says no, it would be a lav. Now, we saw also yesterday an important difference between a kares situation and a lav situation. If you violate a kares prohibition, basically that marriage is considered null and void. And it's as if you weren't married to the person. You don't need a divorce. You don't need to separate from the person. It's not a real marriage. However, if it's just a lav, then the marriage takes effect. And so as a result, there would be divorce. Okay. And of course, if the prohibition is subject to kares, so then there's no there's no application of Yibum and Chalitza to the Chalutza if she were to marry somebody else. Okay, so now let's continue from where we are. We're 10 lines up, first word on the line on Yud Bet, and we are going to have an effort. We're going to cite a brisa. Rabbi Yochanan is going to ask Reish Lakish from the first line of the brisa, and Reish Lakish is going to respond by saying, hey, the end of the brisa is more consistent with me than with you. So each of them is going to have half a brisa that is like them, and we're going to go through today, and we're going to resolve that in the first part of today's daf. So let's take a look. Again, 10 lines up. Esvei Rabbi Yochanan the Reish Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan asked Reish Lakish from the following brisa. If, okay, we'll stick with this case of Ruvain, Levi, and Shimon. Ruvain was married to Rachel, and Ruvain dies without children, and now Levi performs chalitza with Rachel, and then marries her, and now he dies. Umes, right? So acholat leavim to v'chazar v'kitcha. So again, Levi did chalitza with Rachel, and then he goes and marries her, which he's not allowed to do. Umes, and now Levi dies. Srika chalitza min ha'achim. It says that Leah requires chalitza from the surviving brother, namely Shimon. So she requires Shimon. Well, that suggests that this was a valid marriage. And we said that if it was a Kares penalty, it wouldn't be a valid marriage. So so it makes sense to me. Rabbi Yochanan says, because I say that a chalutza is only prohibited with a negative commandment to marry the other brothers, but because that's why she needs chalitza, because it was a valid marriage, and so so the other brothers are not allowed to marry her, so they have to perform chalitza. But according to you, amai tzricha chalitza. Why in the world would she need chalitza? It certainly seems like this is good according to me. But Reish Lakish responds, no, but take a look at the second half of the brisa. What about the end of the brisa? Now one of the brothers goes, so Shimon now goes and marries Leah. Ein la alav klum. There's no requirement of anything from him, meaning that the marriage does not take effect. And if it was true, like you say, Rabbi Yochanan, that the prohibition is only a lav and not a kares prohibition, amai ein la alav klum. Why is it that she doesn't require any kind of divorce to get rid of the Shimon if they aren't happy with one another? Why should she be able to literally just walk out the door? And it's like me, because it must be like me that it's a kares prohibition, and that's why there was no marriage there, and so as a result, there's no requirement for any divorce. So Amar Rav Sheshes attempts to answer the problem for Rabbi Yochanan, but he's not going to be successful. So let's take a look and see what he says. He's going to cite a new opinion. Seva atan la Rabbi Akiva. Maybe the end is according to Rabbi Akiva. Da Amar ein kedushin tovsin b'chayve lavin. Because so Rabbi Yochanan says that it's a lav that's involved, and he says that, and the second part of the Mishnah says that in that case there's no marriage whatsoever. So that shows that must be like Rabbi Akiva. So because Rabbi Akiva says that in a lav situation, such as a chalutza, a woman who had chalitza performed on her, or performed the ceremony of chalitza herself, so in connection with one of the brothers, well, that woman is prohibited by a lav to marry any of the brothers. And so if in fact she were to marry any of the brothers, according to Rabbi Akiva, that would not be a valid marriage, and therefore there would be no divorce requirement. This is consistent with Rabbi Akiva's general philosophy of a broader definition of mamzer. We don't actually paskin that way, but we'll see it more as we proceed through Yevamos. But now the Gemara is going to point out the problem with saying that the end of the Mishnah is like Rabbi Akiva, because v'lisnei l'divrei Rabbi Akiva ein la, and this is a change, even though it says low in the text. The Masorah says the Hagos Habach says that we should change it to ein la alav klum, right? So the Gemara is pointing out that if we are following Rabbi Akiva, we don't have to wait for the end of the brisa to give Rabbi Akiva's opinion. Rabbi Akiva would disagree also with the first part of the brisa. The first part of the brisa, remember, says that if Levi marries Rachel, with whom he had performed chalitza, right? So Rachel was married to Reuven. Reuven dies without children. Levi performs chalitza with Rachel, and now he goes ahead and he marries her. We said that there was a concept of that now when Levi dies without children, that person requires chalitza. But if according to Rabbi Akiva, even in that case, ein la alav klum. She doesn't require anything. She doesn't require the marriage that Rachel has to Leah is not a valid marriage because she's a chalutza. And once she's a chalutza, she's prohibited with a lav even to Levi. And so as a result, that marriage isn't a valid marriage. And so the whole concept of chalitza shouldn't apply to any of the brothers, but yet the Reisha of the Brisa said that she requires chalitza from one of the surviving brothers, namely from Shmuel and Shimon in our case of Reuven, Levi, and Shimon. So it doesn't make any sense. Even the beginning of the brisa doesn't make sense according to, if you're going to introduce Rabbi Akiva, you should introduce Rabbi Akiva on the very start of the Mishnah. So as a result, in fact, our Gemara says at the top of Yud Aleph Amud Aleph, Kasha. In fact, you're right. That is a very difficult situation. So now how are we going to answer this? Again, we now have a brisa, where the first part is inconsistent with Reish Lakish, and the second part is inconsistent with Rabbi Yochanan. So Rav Ashi Savar La Reish Lakish, Umitaritz La Rabbi Shimon. So we're going to have Rav Ashi agrees with Reish Lakish, and he's going to explain the brisa using the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. Ravina Savar La Rabbi Yochanan Umitaritz Kirabanan. So Ravina is going to agree with Rabbi Yochanan, and he's going to answer the brisa like the Rabbanan. So now we need to remember what Rabbi Shimon and Rabbanan say. The debate that they have is in connection with a brother who was not alive when the brother without children dies. So Reuven marries Rachel and dies without children, and then Levi is born. So Levi is not allowed to marry Rachel. Now, there's a debate as to how long that prohibition goes. According to the rabbis, according to the Chachamim, it doesn't. To the Rabbanan, it doesn't make a difference how much later Levi is born when compared to Reuven and Rachel. When Reuven dies, if Levi is born anytime after Reuven dies, he is not allowed ever to marry Rachel. However, according to Shimon disagrees. Shimon says the following: if we have Reuven married to Rachel and Levi is born after Reuven dies, it's possible that he can marry Rachel. What's the example? If Reuven marries Rachel and dies without any children, and now Shimon is already alive, and Shimon marries Rachel and performs yibum to her, and now Levi is born when Rachel is already married to Shimon, and now unfortunately, Shimon also dies without any children. Well, now, because there was a new relationship, a new marriage between Shimon and Rachel, when Shimon dies without any children, Levi who's now alive at the time of that death, is now allowed to marry her according to Shimon, according to Rebbe Shimon. Whereas, again, the rabbis would say, doesn't make a difference because Levi was born after Reuven died, Rachel will always be prohibited. So that's the debate between Rabbi Shimon and the Rabbanan. And now let's take a look inside, and we're going to go through the two explanations. First, according to Rav Ashi, and then explaining Reish Lakish, and then according to Ravina, explaining Rabbi Yochanan. So Rav Ashi, Savar la Reish Lakish u'mitaris la Rabbi Shimon. How does he do that? Hacholitz livimto v'chazar v'kitsha. So if one performed, so what did our Brisa say? Our Brisa said that one performed Yibum, and then he went back and married her. Sricha chalitza min ha'achim. He needs chalitza from the brothers. So man achen, which brothers are we talking about? So achen hayeludin, it's the brothers that are born later. They were born after the chalitza and after Rabbi Shimon, and after Shimon married Rachel. So again, Reuven married Rachel and died without any children, and now Shimon goes and performs Yibum to her. So, I'm sorry, I apologize, I messed that up. Let me start again. So Reuven married Rachel, and Reuven dies without any children, and now Shimon performs Chalitza to Rachel, and now he goes ahead and he marries her anyway, even though he was prohibited from doing so. And now, after that marriage has taken place, now Levi is born. And now, after Levi is born, Shimon dies without any children. Well, in that situation, according to Rebbe Shimon, that the marriage was a valid marriage. And there's no prohibition of being an afterborn brother because he was born after the marriage existed, after the marriage between Shimon and Rachel existed. And so as a result, Levi does have an obligation to perform chalitza. So we've explained how the first part of the Mishnah can apply according to Reish Lakish. Because while the other brothers had a kares, any brothers who were alive when Reuven died would have a kares prohibition to marrying Rachel because chalitza had been performed. Levi, who was born after not only the chalitza, but more importantly, after the marriage between Shimon and Rachel, Levi was born after that. And so as a result, Levi doesn't have that kares prohibition. And as a result, he is allowed to, he does have the ability to perform Yibum and Chalitza. And so as a result, that's why she requires Chalitza. And again, she still has a prohibition because she's not, she was a Chalitza that had a Yevamot. So as a result, I don't think he's not allowed to actually choose the Yibum option in this case, but he's allowed to do Chalitza. And indeed, he's required to do Chalitza. So, Amad Echad, and now what happens in the second part of our brisa? Well, now we can explain it according to that one has no problem according to Reish Lakish. Amad Echad min hanoladim v'kidsha. If now one of the brothers gets up and marries Rachel after both Reuven and Shimon have died, so then that we're talking about ein la alav klum, right? She doesn't require any kind of divorce document. Come on, then we're talking about min hanoladim v'kidsha, right? If one of the brothers who was already born, so we're talking about a brother who was alive at the time that the chalitza was done, and alive at the time that Shimon married Rachel, and so as a result, he is prohibited with kares, according to Reish Lakish, to marry Rachel, and so as a result, since the prohibition of kares applies, ein la alav klum, she doesn't require any kind of divorce. So Kaman Reish Lakish, again, all fits. Rav Ashi has now explained the brisa by dividing the brisa into two halves. The first half of the brisa is talking about a later born child who, as a result, does have an obligation to do chalitza, and the second part of the brisa is talking about an earlier born child who is subject to a kares penalty and therefore cannot do chalitza, and therefore if he marries her, there's no marriage whatsoever. Okay, and Ravina Savarla Rabbi Yochanan Mataras Le'aliba de Rabbanan, and Rabbi Yochanan Ravina provides the answer according to Rabbi Yochanan and says the following, right? So now we take a look at the first part of the mission. Of course, the first part of the brisa, the first part of the brisa doesn't require any kind of repair. Right? So Shimon performs chalitza on Rachel and now goes ahead and marries her, which is a lav, right? According to Rabbi Yochanan, Srika chalitza min ha'achin. And it's a lav for any of the other brothers to marry her. So all of the brothers, they have to perform chalitza. So man achin, who are the achin, ha'achin ha'noladin. These are the people who are already born. Kaman, Rabbi Yochanan. It's exactly like Rabbi Yochanan. The first part of our brisa has no problems. Now, what about the second part? So now here comes Ravina to rescue Rabbi Yochanan. Now it's one of the afterborn brothers. And again, according to Ein la alav klum, kaman karabanan, right? So if now Levi, who was born after Reuven dies, comes and actually marries Rachel after Shimon dies also without children, because Levi was born after Reuven died, so Levi has a kares penalty to marry Rachel. And so as a result, according to the rabbis, and so since he has a kares penalty, according to the rabbis, to marry Rachel, the marriage is not valid, and she doesn't require any kind of divorce for her to be able to go and marry somebody else. So we have now explained both opinions. So Itmar, haba al Yevamot, if somebody comes and now we're going to have a quote, a dispute that again highlights the dispute between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. So Itmar haba Yevamot, we have a statement that if a person comes and has relations with a Yevamot, meaning that he takes her as a Yibum. So again, we'll start with Reuven is married to Rachel and Leah. So Reuven is married to Rachel and Leah. Shimon comes and does Yibum with Rachel. And now Levi comes and wants to marry Leah and goes ahead and marries Leah. So Pligi ba Rav Acha v'Ravina, Rav Acha and Ravina disagree. Chad Amar b'kares. One says that what Levi has done is punishable by kares. V'chad Amar b'aseh, and one says that the only violation is an aseh. So Manda Amar b'kares Reish Lakish. The one who says that it's a kares penalty is like Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish, as we saw, says that anybody other than the person who performs chalitza to marry the chalutza, all the other penalties are kares, not just a lav. Umanda amar ba'aseh b'Rabbi Yochanan, and the one who says that it's an aseh, and Rabbeinu Tam here says that really should the Gemara should actually say a lav, is Rabbi Yochanan, that it's a violation of Rabbi Yochanan. So there we have further evidence of this dispute between Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. Period. End of discussion. Now we're going to turn to a series of 4 tzarot. Okay, we're going to talk about 4 tzarot. This is tzara number 1. We're going to talk about a tzara of a sota. Now, before we do that, I want to just note that a sota, usually when we speak about it in the Torah, we're talking about somebody who is suspected of adultery. That is generally the definition of a sota in the Torah. Somebody who's warned about it and then goes ahead and secludes themselves. But the term sota can also mean in the Gemara somebody who actually had adultery. And here, that is going to be our meaning. We're going to be talking about somebody who had adultery. So again, using Ruvain married to Rachel and Leah. Rachel now goes and has adultery, and now Ruvain dies without any children. Now Ruvain's supposed to divorce Rachel, but he hadn't yet done so when he dies without any children. The question is, what's the status of Leah? Are the other brothers, Levi and Shimon, are they required to do yibum with her or chalitza, or do we say that because the Rachel has now become prohibited to Ruvain, so as a result, and she effectively becomes prohibited to all the other brothers as well? So that's going to be the question, and therefore maybe yibum does not apply to the co-wife of an adulteress. So let's take a look. So Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav, Sarasota Asura, the co-wife of an adulteress is actually forbidden, meaning that you can't even do yibum to her. There's no yibum, there's no chalitza, because tuma ksiv ba ka'arayot. There is a reference to tuma in the psukim, which is written in connection with an adulteress in the section of arayot. So if we take a look in Vayikra Perek Yud Chet, we have the reference to somebody being defiled, somebody having adultery, and that's going to be a problem. So Mesiv, Rav Chisda challenges this ruling because, again, the ruling is that if Rachel engages in adultery, not only is Rachel not subject to chalitza, but even her co-wife Leah is not subject to yibum or chalitza. But Mesiv Rav Chisda quotes a Mishnah. This is a Mishnah that we're going to learn in basically 2 months or so, a little over 2 months. Rabbi Shimon, that's on Daf Pei Zayin Amabet. Rabbi Shimon says, Biasa o chalitzasa me'achiv shel rishon poteres tzarasa. That what does that mean? First of all, what's the Mishnah dealing? The Mishnah is dealing with a woman whose husband went overseas and who was then informed by a witness that her husband had died. And then based on that, she went and got married to somebody. Unfortunately, it turned out that her first husband was alive. And so now her first husband came back. And so as a result, her original marriage was never terminated. And so now the second marriage that she went into is considered an adulterous relationship. She wasn't allowed to be married. So under biblical law, however, as long as the first husband is not a Kohen, she's allowed to go back to him. However, the rabbis created a penalty and said that she's not allowed to go back to her first husband. So now that's the case that we're talking about. So Rabbi Shimon Omer, with respect to that case, and the first opinion is that the Mishnah teaches that if before divorcing that woman, the husband dies, so the husband who was away overseas and thought to have died comes back, and now he's required to divorce the woman his wife, who went and had married somebody else in the interim because she thought her husband had died. And so, but before he does so, he dies. And so the question is, so according to the first opinion, she requires chalitza from the brothers of her deceased husband, and she may not be taken in yibum. However, now we're going to get a different opinion. Biasa o chalitza sa me'achav achiv shel rishon. If somebody were to perform yibum with her or chalitza, then poteres tzarasa. It is a valid action, and it exempts her co-wives from yibum and chalitza. So the point is that not only do we see that there's chalitza, an issue of chalitza in connection with the co-wife of somebody who performed adultery, but even the adulteress herself has the concept of chalitza. So, and yet, what did Rav Yehuda say in the name of Rav? Rav said, Sarasota Asura. that she's forbidden, and therefore there's no yibum and no chalitza, even for the co-wife, and certainly not for the woman who engaged in adultery. So Amar Lach Rav. So of course, there's a very big difference between somebody who engages in adultery and somebody who thought that their husband died and went and married somebody else. Amar Lach Rav. Amina Lach Anasota Doraisa. Rav would tell you, I'm talking about somebody who's an adulteress according to the Torah, and as a result is effectively totally prohibited. And you're talking about a woman who didn't mean to perform adultery and ended up performing adultery, and as a result is only treated like an adulteress according to the rabbis. So, of course, there's a big difference between those cases. So that's not a proof against me. So now the question is why did Rav Chisda think that it would be a good proof? And according to the one who asked the question, namely Rav Chisda, my karila, what was he thinking? Of course, there's a big difference. So Kasavar called it Tikkun Rabbanan, the Tikkun Rabbanan, Ke'en D'Oraisa Tikkun. We have a general principle. And we're not going to be able to go into maybe the question of why doesn't that principle apply here, but we have a general principle that when the rabbis institute a takana, that takana they institute just like the associated biblical law. So all the rules associated with that would also apply here. And so he would have thought that since the rabbis say she's an adulteress, she must be treated like an adulteress for all means, including in connection with chalitza. But that the answer is that in fact we do not treat her that way. So that was challenge number one. Challenge number two, Masiv Rav Ashi. Rav Ashi challenges. What about the following Mishnah? This Mishnah is one that we learned at the very beginning of this. This is the Mishnah that we will learn. That is the very beginning of the first Mishnah in Masechah Sota. Nichnasa imo l'seisa. If a woman goes into a secluded place with him, this is not obviously the very start of the Mishnah. This is the point is that the husband has said that you're not allowed to go and be alone with this person and with this man, and now she goes and is alone with him. V'shasa imo kedei tuma, and she's long enough alone with him in order that they could have had relations. So asura levesa, so she's now forbidden to go back to her husband. V'asura le'achol b'truma, and if her husband is a Kohen, she's not even allowed to eat truma. The mace, and if her husband were to die, choletzes, she has to velomis yabemes, she has to have chalitza done to her and not yibum. So we see here is somebody who is considered an adulteress, and the Mishnah says that she requires chalitza. But Rav had said that such a woman, and even her co-wife, doesn't require chalitza. It doesn't require chalitza at all. It's as if she's not, and so she can marry anybody she wants. So Amar Lach Rav would explain to you, Amina Lach Ana Sota Vadai. I'm talking about a confirmed adulteress. But Amrat Li At Sota Safek, and you're telling me about the case of a traditional sota where she's only suspected. Nobody saw her engage in the marital relations, and so as a result, it's just a suspicion. And so that's why the cases are treated differently. So yes, if if a wife is suspected of adultery, then and the husband dies before divorcing her, so then the other brothers of the husband have to perform chalitza and are not allowed to perform yibum, but at least the concept of chalitza applies. But on the other hand, if you have a confirmed adulteress and now the husband dies before divorcing her, and then no one can do any kind of yibum, neither to her or chalitza, neither to her or to any of the co-wives. All of them are not subject to the laws of yibum and chalitza at all. So so that's the difference. It's a very big difference between a confirmed adulteress and a suspected adulteress. So umayshna sota vadai. So right, why is it that a sota vadai is treated differently? So Rav would explain, mishum t'ksiv ba tuma. It's because when it came to a confirmed adulteress, the Torah refers to her as tum'ah. We'll define tum'ah in this case not as impure, but as defiled. And so she is treated as she was defiled. And so as a result, but 1 second. All right, so that's the explanation. But the problem with that explanation is sota suffix nami. Even a suspected adulteress is also has the word tuma next to her. Tuma ksiva ba. It also says the word tuma by her. And so as a result, the same law should apply. How do I know that it says tuma by her? Because Tanya, we have a brisa. So the brisa is going to quote two opinions. It's only going to be the second opinion that's going to say that has the tuma in connection with her. But let's take a look and we'll see. Rabbi Yossi ben Kefar Omer Mishum Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Yossi ben Kefar says, Hamaxir Gerusha. So if one tries to take back, let's just remind ourselves of this law. A husband, if he divorces his wife, he's allowed to remarry her as long as he's not a Kohen. However, if the divorced wife goes and marries someone else, then she is not allowed, then the first husband is not allowed to marry her. Okay, so to prevent a system of wife swapping, of divorces and wife swapping that might otherwise occur if you were to allow that kind of behavior. So again, let's talk about the story. So Hamaxer Gerusha. So Rabbi Yossi ben Kefar says that somebody takes back his divorcee min hanasuyin after a second marriage was had with Nisuin, meaning that it was a complete second marriage, Asura, that is a case of forbiddenness, and she is not allowed to marry, and the marriage does not take effect. Min ha'erusin, however, if the second marriage was only from erusin, there are, again, as a reminder, our marriage ceremony has two parts. Erusin, also known as kedushin, and nisuin. The erusin is is when we say the harei at mekudeshes li, and then the nisuin is some second aspect, whether it's being under the chuppah together or being going into the yichud room together, all those different possibilities. Well, muteris. In that situation, if only the engagement happened, only the first half of the marriage ceremony happened, then muteris. She is permitted to go back and marry her husband. Why? Mishum shenemar acharei asher hutamah. Because when it says, when is it that she can't marry her first husband? It's after she has been tum'ah, after she has been defiled, which Rabbi Yossi ben Kefar says is referring to a sexual relationship with her second husband. The Chachamim, however, the Chachamim say no, even if it's just Erusin, she is prohibited to marry her first husband. Both cases she's prohibited to marry her first husband. So in second, what does he do? What do the rabbis do with the line acharei asher hutama? So elamani mekayem acharei asher hutama. So the rabot sota nishanistera. It comes to include an adulteress, a suspected adulteress, a sota who was alone with the person that her husband, with the man that her husband said she should avoid. And so we see that according to the Chachamim, that the word tum'ah is written in connection with a suspected adulteress. So as a result, the same law should apply. My nistera. So what does it mean, nistera? So in second, so don't, when the rabbis say l'rabot sota shenistra, no, it doesn't mean shenistra and just being suspected. Nivala. We're talking about where it was confirmed that she had relations with the man. So don't say it's a suspected adultery case, it's a confirmed adultery case. But my karile nistra, well then why did the rabbis use this language of nistra, of secluded? So lishnama al yanakat, as is often the case, the Gemara likes to use euphemisms. And so it means that she in fact was a confirmed adulteress. Well, 1 second. If you want to say nivala, you want to say that she was a confirmed adulteress, tuma behed yiksiva. We have another pasuk that already has that word tuma written by it. So why do we need a second pasuk to be written about it? V'nistera v'hi nitma'a. This is in Sefer Dvar. We had, this was in Sefer Bamidbar. It says v'nistera v'hi nitma'a. That was in the discussion of the Sota herself, in the discussion of the Sota case. But in Dvarim, we had it also now say Tuma. So why do we need to say Tuma twice in connection with a confirmed adulteress? So the Gemara answers, L'mekem alei Allah belav, in order to say that she is chayiv also in a lav, because as Rashi points out, that without the lav, without the prohibited, we would say that there's only an assay that is involved in taking her back. That there was only an a positive commandment that results in a negative commandment, that he's not allowed to be with her, and so as a result, the implication is that he needs to divorce her, and so if he doesn't, he's violated that positive commandment essentially to divorce her, and so now in addition he will also have violated a prohibition. So as that's why we need to have the repetition. The Rabbi Yossi ben Kefar. So all right, so now we've explained it according to the Chachamim. What about Rabbi Yossi ben Kefar? So la besota leisle. In fact, he does not say because he uses the pasuk to talk about the case of marriage of a woman who gets divorced and then remarries her husband. For him, there is not, in fact, a negative prohibition for a husband to be with his wife who has had an adultery relationship. And so, la besota leisle, there is no negative commandment in connection with a confirmed adulteress. Va'afilu zanai nami, even if it's confirmed that even if she definitely committed adultery. My timer, what's the reason? Havya beishis ksivba, because we only have an assay, right? It just says that the pasuk says, right, according to Rabbi Yossi ben Kefar, the prohibition stated in this pasuk, in the pasuk of in Dvarim, va'isa leisha cher, o ki yamuta isha acharon asher lakacha lo leisha lo yuchal ba'ala rishon asher shechal ashuv lekachta lihiyot lo leisha. So that concept of lihiyot lo leisha tells us that it's only an overturning of a positive commandment, not a negative commandment. So for an adulteress, her husband is restricted from living with her only and she was defiled. And that's a restriction that is not stated as a negative commandment. So as a result, one who violates it is not subject to lashes. So the point is that the prohibition in the pasuk in Sefer Dvarim is only of getting married again, but not in connection with somebody who had an adulterous affair. Okay, so that is case number one of the tsaras. That's a co-wife of somebody who committed adultery. Now we go to co-wife of case number two. And we're going to have four, but I believe the next two are going to be done tomorrow. So Boimine Rav Yehuda Miriv Sheshes, Hamatzi Grusha Som B'Sheminisas. What about somebody? So we just, although our main topic here was an adulteress and the co-wife of an adulteress, but this touched on the topic of a divorcee who remarries her husband after marrying somebody else. What about that person's co-wife? So again, Reuven married Rachel. They got divorced, and now Rachel goes and marries David. David and Rachel get divorced, and now Reuven marries Rachel again. So now Reuven dies, and he's married both to Rachel and Leah. Sarasa ma umes, right? Hamaxer grushaso mashinisas, right? So Reuven married Rachel again after she had been married to David, and now Umes, and now Reuven dies. Sarasa mahu. What's the halacha associated with Leah? Leah was Rachel's co-wife, and so do we say that she's allowed to engage in yibum or not? Okay, so the Gemara is going to look at this question two ways. So, Aliba, the Rabbi Yossi ben Kefar. So we have two opinions. We have the Rabbi Yossi ben Kefar opinion, and we have the Chachamim opinion. So first, we're going to suggest that we know the answer for Rabbi Yossi ben Kefar, and we're asking according to the Chachamim. And then we're going to say, no, we know the answer for the Chachamim, and we're asking according to Rabbi Yossi bar Kefar. So bottom line is, we can ask according to either of them. But let's take a look and see how that works out. So I'll leave it to Rabbi Yossi ben Kefar Loti Boilach. There's no question when you think about it from the perspective of Rabbi Yossi ben Kefar. Why? Kaven to Amar Rabbi Yossi ben Kefar, since Rabbi Yossi ben Kefar says Tuma Machazir Grusha Sohu Tuksiv, right? We have the word Tuma in connection with somebody who goes back and marries their divorcee. So Tsarasa Kamosa. So the point is that her co-wife is like her. So just like the divorcee is considered defiled, and therefore there's no opportunity to perform yibum with respect to her, and so she doesn't need yibum and she doesn't need chalitza, so too, Sarasa, her co-wife, is totally excluded from the concept of yibum and chalitza. And if you want to say, 1 second, isn't the divorcee have a special rule because it also says to'eva, that she's rejected? So he to'eva ve'ein banah to'evim. So and maybe I might think that only she is a to'eva, but not her co-wife. So I can explain that. No, it's not referring to her being rejected, but not the co-wife. It's her being rejected, but not her sons. He to'eva ve'ein banah to'evim. Right? She's rejected, but not the children are rejected. And Rashi explains that this is teaching that although she is forbidden to her original husband, if they remarry and she bears a daughter, the daughter is permitted to marry a Kohen. There are certain people who are not allowed to marry a Kohen, and one might have thought that this would be one of them. But no, in fact, she is. Although it was prohibited for the parents to be married, doesn't result in the daughter being prohibited to marry a Kohen. So Hatzarasa Toeva, but in fact, her co-wife is also considered rejected, or is also considered a to'eva, and so therefore there's no yibum applied. So we've now shown that there's no question, according to Rabbi Yossi ben Kefar, clearly yibum does not apply to the co-wife of a divorcee who's been retaken in marriage. So kiti ba'ilach. So where do we have the question? So we have the question aliba de rabbanan, according to the rabbis, right? Afal gavta amar rabbanan. Even though the rabbis say tuma b'sota kedhu diksiv, that the tuma that is written in connection with a remarried divorcee is actually telling us about an adulteress. So ein mikra yotze midei pshuto. Nonetheless, the context, even though we're applying that rule about an adulteress, the context still suggests that the meaning is that it's talking about a divorcee. And so as a result, that would suggest that in fact, the rule of a divorcee is just like the rule of an adulteress, and therefore no yibum would apply. O Dilma Kaven de Iakar. Or do we say, no, even though the plain meaning of the verse is relating to a remarried divorcee, because we've now applied those words to the concept of a confirmed adulteress, it does not apply at all to a remarried divorcee, and so as a result, the remarried divorcee does not have that same rule, and maybe the co-wife is eligible for yibum. So that is explanation number one of how we can understand the question. We can understand the question is according to the Rabbanan and not according to Rabbi Yossi ben Kefar. But now we can do it the exact opposite. So Ika de Amri Aliba de Rabban and Loti Boilach, I can say that in fact, don't ask the questions according to the rabbis. Kavan Iatkar Iakar. Once we uprooted it, it's completely uprooted. And so as a result, therefore, actual Yibum would apply to a co-wife of the woman who was divorced and then taken back in marriage after marrying somebody else. So Kiti Bailach, but where can I ask the question about what the status of the co-wife of a woman who was divorced and taken back in marriage should be? Then I would ask Aliba de Rabbi Yosef ben Kefar. I can ask according to him. What was the question? Afal Gavda Rabbi Yosef ben Kefar, even though Rabbi Yosef ben Kefar says Tuma Bavaksa Grusha, so who Dixiva, because that the Tuma that is written is in connection with a woman who gets remarried, a remarried divorcee after marrying somebody else, and that's what the pasuk is talking about according to Rabbi Yosef ben Kefar. But Miyat Rachmanahi Toeva, but the pasuk also says that Toeva, that she is rejected. The Ain't Sarasa Toeva, and we can say that implies that her co-wife is not rejected. Odilma. Or maybe we would say that she is rejected, but not her children are rejected. And her co-wife is also rejected. So as a result, we've provided two ways of understanding that Rabbi Yosef ben Kefar. And so as a result, it's unclear, according to Rabbi Yosef ben Kefar, do we say that in fact the co-wife, that while we certainly will say that the woman who was divorced marries somebody else and then gets remarried, that there's no concept of yibum for her, but maybe we can say that there is a concept of yibum for her co-wife. So now we're going to give one try, and then we're going to pause for the weekend. So Amar Le, so Rav Sheish is going to try and answer the question. Tanisua, we learned in the Mishnah. This is a Mishnah on Daf Mem Dalid. Haisa achas ksheira v'achas psula. If you have, and the issue is that the language of ksheira and psula is unclear. We're going to offer one possible explanation. So if we have one of the widows who is kosher and one of the widows who is pasul, so Ruvain is married to Rachel and Leah, and Rachel is kosher and Leah is pasul. So the imhaya choletz, if the surviving brothers, if Levi now wants to perform chalitza, choletz la psula, he should do the chalitza to the psula, namely to Leah. But if he wants to do yibum, miyabim l'ksheira, he should do yibum to the kosher one, namely he should do yibum to Rachel. So my ksheira, my psula. What is the meaning of kosher and pasul? Right? So ilema ksheira la alma psula alma. If you want to say, so now that Mishnah is talking about a Yisrael, brothers, two brothers who are Yisrael, not brothers who are Kohanim. Now, if you want to say that when we say ksheira, we mean kosher to the entire world, i.e., somebody who is able not only to marry Yisrael, but is able to marry a Kohen, and psula means psula to the entire world, and somebody who is not able to marry a Kohen. Well, kevan l'didei chazya, as long as the person is able to be married by the yavam, by the surviving brother, my nafkalemina. What difference does he care whether or not the person is permitted to marry a Kohen? It's all that elalav, it must be ksheira lei, that when we say kosher, we mean kosher to him, and psula psula, and when we say pasul, we mean pasul to him. And umaynihu, and which kind of category must we be talking about? Machzir grusha. So we're talking about a remarried divorcee. V'katani v'im haya miyabim l'ksheira, that he should perform yibum to the kosher one. That shows that the co-wife of a remarried divorcee may be taken in yibum. So no, we're going to now reject this proof. Lo, not true. La'olam ksheira la'alma psula alma. Really, when we say kosher and pasul, we're talking about whether or not the person is allowed to marry a Kohen. So now what about the question that we asked? Udika amra, and that which you asked, that's what you said. Kevin chazya my nafkale mine. Why? What difference does he care as long as he's able to do it? Mishum de Reb Yosef, Damar Reb Yosef kan shana Rabbi. That Reb Yosef said, this is what Rebbe taught us. He taught us the following lesson: Lo yishpoch adam meivoro ba'acherim tzrichim lahem. you should never pour out water if other people can need it. So what does that mean in this context? The point is the following. We have Reuven is married to Rachel and Leah. Reuven now dies without any children. Levi is now able to do Yibum to both Rachel and Leah. Now it turns out that Rachel, due to the status of her birth, is not allowed to marry a Kohen, but or just to her status. So for example, Rachel, before she married Reuven, she was married to Shimon, not a brother, just somebody else named Shimon. So Shimon and Rachel get divorced. Now Rachel marries Reuven, and Leah marries Reuven as well. Well, because Rachel was divorced, she is not allowed to marry a Kohen. On the other hand, Leah is because Reuven has now died, Leah is a widow. A widow who has never been divorced is allowed to marry a Kohen. So what Rav Yosef is teaching in the name of Abaye, in the name of Rebbe, is the following: is that if Levi is going to choose to engage in chalitza and thereby prevent any of the brothers from marrying any of the women, he should do chalitza specifically with Rachel. Why? Because if he does chalitza with Leah, well, then Leah becomes equivalent to a divorcee. And so as a result, now Leah will not be able to marry any Kohanim. Whereas if instead Levi does chalitza with Rachel, if Levi does chalitza with Rachel, who is already divorced, well, already Rachel's not allowed to marry a Kohen. So as a result, now when he does chalitza to Rachel, there's no change in the world for Kohanim. Kohanim already couldn't marry Rachel, and Kohanim can marry Leah. And so by doing chalitza with Rachel and not Leah, Leah is able to marry a Kohen if she were to meet the right guy, and it happens to be that he's a Kohen. And so as a result, that's what that Mishnah is telling us. That Mishnah is telling us that you should be a mensch, and you should be a nice person, and that if in fact somebody needs to do chalitza, one should do chalitza in a manner that minimizes the impact on other men, namely and especially Kohanim. That you shouldn't do chalitza on the woman that could otherwise marry a Kohen. And so that's the lesson. So in the end, of course, we haven't answered the question. And so as a result, I'm sure you want to know the answer to the question. And so you'll have to turn in tomorrow as we attempt again to answer the question of if Reuven illegally remarries his divorcee after she married another man, and now Reuven dies without children, what's the status of Reuven's other wives? Are they able to do Yibum with Reuven's brothers? Very good question, and we'll find out, God willing, tomorrow. Have a great Shabbos.
You too, Rabbi. Thank you. Have a good Shabbos.
Thank you. Bye-bye.